The weather on Sunday, June 15th, 2025 could not have been more perfect if it tried. With clear blue skies as far as the eye could see across the Wyoming prairies, we were up early to make a roughly 2-hour drive into coal country. We first hit some brief sightseeing around Wyoming State Capitol, including a look at the Francis E. Warren Air Force Base, one of 3 strategic missile bases in the United States. From here, we hopped onto the seemingly seldom used Wyoming section of I-25 heading north. Seriously, this was one of the most low-density interstates I'd ever driven on. We made a pit stop on the way north to take a look at some more Cold War military history, a rural missile site that was essentially the precursor to the facility we stopped at earlier in the day, where all these operations are now centralized. After getting back on the road, we continued pushing north towards our destination of the Powder River Basin, and soon we began running into trains hauling the region's primary export southeast. Stopping in Glendo, we were able to pull over and get set up for a loaded coal drag led by 2 BNSF SD-70 Aces. Glendo is located on BNSF's Canyon subdivision and is a tributary of today's main attraction, the triple and quadruple tracked BNSF Orange subdivision serving the coal mines of the Powder River Basin. The canyon links up with the Orange sub at its south end at a place called Bridger Junction. From there, the Orange sub runs another 10 miles to Shawnee Junction, where UP's line from Nebraska joins into the Orange, with trains operating via trackage rights to reach the coal mines, which are all spread out across the next 117 miles of trackage to the line's terminus at Donkey Creek Junction in Gillette, Wyoming. With 40% of U.S. coal coming from this region, the Orange sub is an incredibly busy place, made better by steep grades giving loaded trains a formidable challenge on the first few miles of their journey. The highlight of the line is Logan Hill, with a 1% grade and a view for miles in both directions. This is where we will spend most of our day and where we will capture some incredible footage of trains battling the elements later this evening. With the loads continuing south, we took off in the opposite direction, leaving the interstate behind and hopping onto a 2-lane highway into the Powder River Basin. The action was almost immediate. We ran into an eastbound loaded UP train first, but more on them in a second. For now, we pulled off Route 59 at a small gravel crossing with antelope grazing close by, and in just a few minutes a train came into the picture. Juxtaposed by clean energy-producing wind turbines, BNSF 8445 makes the trek west to grab another load of black diamonds from the mines. Remember that UP train from the highway? Well, it hasn't gotten very far. With an uphill grade and a quick departure after filming the empties, we made it to milepost 107 ahead of the entire train as it struggled uphill towards Shawnee Junction and home rails in just another 10 miles. We didn't stick around long at this location as I had covered it more extensively in a previous visit a few years ago, and our ultimate destination of Logan Hill was still about 40 minutes away. Bill is the only named town one will pass through on the south end of the Orange Sub, and even still it isn't much of a town at all. What is notable about Bill for railroad purposes is Union Pacific's staging yard, which serves as a crew change point between UP over-the-road crews and last-mile mine crews that take the trains to be loaded and then back to Bill. Leaving town, we run into another UP empty consist beginning its final trek to the mines, having just departed the yard. We pulled off just ahead of them at the Route 59 overpass located at milepost 78 and got set up just in the nick of time. As is typical with the Oren line, we did not have to wait long for more action. Meeting the empties just west of the overpass was a mile of BNSF loads being pulled by 3 wide-open motors. The 2 lead GEs on this train are relatively recent additions to the BNSF fleet. After years of purchasing locomotives with only 4 of the 6 axles powered, BNSF has recently started acquiring more traditional 6-axle power in the form of ES44 ACs and ET44 ACs. Naturally, this extra pulling power as compared to the C4 models is most useful on heavy coal trains, so many of these new units have found their way into service in Wyoming. This next scene is one that clearly exemplifies a sign of the times on the Orange Sub and in the Powder River Basin. While still incredibly active with traffic, coal production and consumption is nowhere near where it was even 10 years ago as more sustainable energy sources come online and power plants across the country continue to move away from burning black diamonds in favor of natural gas. This has led to a significant reduction in coal traffic over this line, which at one time could see easily over 120 trains daily utilizing all 4 main tracks. Now, Main 1 is being utilized for miles of coal hopper storage, being rendered completely out of service for through movements. Additionally, with fewer coal trains clogging up this once dedicated line, there is now space to run some non-coal traffic through this region, and that is exactly what is happening here as an intermodal stack train is heading eastbound out of the Pacific Northwest. If you told someone in 2008 about this scene of intermodal trains and stored consists on the Oren line, they might call you crazy, but here we are in 2025. With the stacker heading east, we hopped back in the car and drove the final few miles to Logan Hill. Located quite a ways from the main highway, this is a very peaceful and undisturbed place. That is, until a train arrives and we didn't have to wait long. UP 5305 would be our first customer at Logan, pulling out of a stop on the 1% grade after stalling out. One of 5305's original 3 units had died, leaving the heavy coal trains stranded without enough horsepower to make it up and over the hill. To address the problem and get the line clear, the Orin dispatcher stopped a second loaded train on the main behind the disabled consist, had them cut their head-end power away, and shove 5305 over the hill, essentially functioning as manned helpers as far as Bill. Like we had seen at the previous location, the straightaways in both directions at Logan Hill are dominated by lines of stored hoppers reflective of the lower demand for coal. We continued observing our surroundings as we waited in the remote Wyoming hills and soon witnessed a huge plume of smoke rising in the distance, likely related to the mining operations in the area. Not only that, but another loaded train soon came into view, which would eventually make its way past our cameras after a long and slow upgrade journey. Union Pacific was king of the rails this morning, with another loaded train soon making its way up Logan Hill behind an incredibly fresh, rebuilt leader. As is typical in the Powder River Basin, there is not much time when action is dull. Halfway into the passing of UP 6540, the train we saw in the distance earlier rounds the bend onto the straightaway with another mile of freshly mined black diamonds. This particular coal train had a cut of what I believe to be frac sand hoppers on the rear behind the DPU. Coal is not the only natural resource extracted from this energy-rich region, and my guess is that these cars were needed for a fracking operation somewhere in the area. Even the Powder River Basin, synonymous with a single type of unit train, is not completely immune to the throw everything on one consist philosophy of precision scheduled railroading. UP number 7234 is the leader on our next train tackling the grade. The C44ACM rebuilds and the AC44CWs that they were developed from have long been staples of the Powder River Basin. The first mass-produced unit to utilize AC traction alongside the EMD SD70 Mac, these big GEs first came onto the scene in the 1990s and were immediately put into coal service by almost every railroad that purchased them, from CSX in West Virginia's hills to CNNW and UP in Wyoming. 30 years after their initial purchase, it's great to see these units getting a new life and continuing to earn their keep on Logan Hill. As 7234 turns to face the automatic signal, we can see yet another empty train climbing towards us in the distance. Like clockwork, in another 3 minutes, the 6540 we saw earlier has taken the place of the westbound empty in the distance, while that train arrives as the rear of 7234 makes its way past the signals. The crew on this empty got on at Bill and is taking the consist the final miles to one of the basin's massive mining facilities to be loaded. Where there were first two loads, there were now two empties. In a few minutes, UP 7763 makes an appearance, and in similar fashion to the last shot, the 7234 appears heading towards Bill in the distance. Having successfully assisted the crippled loads to Bill, the 2 helper locomotives from the first train we saw at Logan Hill are now heading back to their consist. A job well done, but unfortunately for this crew, their day was far from over, but more on that later. The westbound parade continues as another empty approaches, this time with some orange power on the point, breaking the endless stream of Uncle Pete's that have traversed the hill thus far. BNSF was now running the show on Logan as soon after another loaded train came creeping around the curve battling the grade. Similar to the AC-44s of the 90s, BNSF utilizes a sizable percentage of their modern SD-70 Ace fleet in coal service, with their high tractive effort and AC traction making them prime candidates to move these heavy trains over the road. As BNSF 8445 makes its way towards us, the radio gives us the first indication of the hectic afternoon that is about to begin unfolding here in the hills of Wyoming.
BNSF 6101, road foreman, over. Go on, go ahead, over. Yeah, I got a question for you. So we got a wind warning of 70-mile-an-hour winds, but where we're at, I mean, that would restrict us to 20 miles an hour, but the wind is like literally not blowing at all where we're at. I mean, trees aren't flapping, the grass isn't moving, nothing. So what's the rule on that?
If you couldn't tell by the camera audio, the wind at Logan Hill was beginning to pick up as a line of afternoon thunderstorms was beginning to develop. With the forecast worsening, the railroad was beginning to take precautions to ensure safe running during the storm, including issuing high wind warnings to trains, which apparently were not super evident at this point in the day, prompting the engineer on that 6101 West, which we will see later in the day, to question the legitimacy of the restriction they were being issued. But more on that to come, as the weather was not here yet and 100 cars of loaded coal were. Remember how I said earlier that there was rarely a dull time of day along the Orange Sub? Well, it might be more accurate to say that there is rarely a time of day where you cannot see a train coming towards you on the Orange Sub. Just as 8445 is about to disappear out of sight, more loads come into the frame. And a quick glance in the opposite direction reveals another train of empties coming towards us. can take a good 10 minutes for trains traveling upgrade to reach our vantage point after first coming into view. BNSF 9013 East is an all-EMD show, and soon enough the whine of 710 engines is filling the air. As the two trains now face each other, a weather-related track patrol shoots up Main 3, putting all 4 main tracks in use in some way or another. As the surroundings become quiet once again, the ominous skies were really moving in at this point in the afternoon, prompting more serious weather warnings covering large portions of the subdivision, with the dispatcher issuing them to every train in the territory.
BNSF 9013 East conductor source at milepost 76 has high weather warning 3258 on the orange sub, starting at 1640 to 1815 Mountain Daylight Time. Milepost 22 to milepost 83, gusts up to 6060 mph, over. That is correct, over. All correct, thanks, out. Go ahead, over.
What you just heard was a weather warning indicating 60-mile-per-hour winds being issued to BNSF 9013 East, the loaded train that we just saw for a 60-mile portion of the Orange subdivision. High winds can be incredibly dangerous for trains, especially out here in Wyoming with no tree cover to break the wind. The warning requires trains to operate at slower speeds to reduce the risk of any rolling stock getting blown over, and while this is not a huge risk for the loaded trains like 9013 East, the light empty consists like this one are an entirely different story. With the dark skies now directly overhead and lightning striking in the distance, I retreated to the car for the next few shots, figuring that standing outside with a metal tripod and no cover was probably not a great idea. As the storm approached, trains kept moving as UP's next round of loads thunders up the grade. Meeting the loads just around the corner would be the BNSF 6101 West, the train that we heard on the radio earlier asking about the validity of the high wind warning at the beginning of the storm. While the warning may have seemed a bit premature an hour ago, they were certainly in the thick of it now. Seeing a thunderstorm out here is really a surreal experience, as you can just watch as it approaches unobstructed with daylight slowly fading away. With the rain now beginning to fall hard and being on an unpaved road, we decided to play it safe and move away from the tracks for a bit. Our drive out yielded some incredible views of lightning striking the ground during the worst of the rainfall before we decided to make our return. Throughout the chaos and flash flood warnings, UP 5307, the train that had provided the helpers earlier to the stalled consist, was finally making their way east, but would run into some more of its own bad luck less than a mile away from our location.
UP 5307 East. Sold out, milepost 68.5, over. What's going on, over? It got real wet real quick. And we lost traction, no sand, over. Roger that. UP 5307 East, can the engineer comply with a stop drop signal at 74? Roger that, engineer on the UP 5307 can comply with the stop drop signal, milepost 74, main 1, over. Okay, roger that, signal coming down. Orland. UP 6760 East got a weather warning number 3258, 3258. From now until transversed. High winds. On the orange sub, this will cover from milepost 22, MP 22, to milepost 83, MP 83. Upgraded to 70 miles per hour. Expect variable winds to 70 miles per hour. Eastward moving thunderstorms, over.
If you followed along with the radio traffic, both flash flood and high wind warnings were both now being given out to trains along the Orange Sub due to the severe storm. Unfortunately for the crew of UP 5307, these warnings could not stop their engines from losing traction and stalling out on the steep grade due to the wet and slippery rails. With no sand in the locomotives to provide extra grip and a 15,000-ton consist, it just was not in the cards for them today. While they were sorting out their next steps and thunder crashed above, an empty BNSF consist met them heading down the hill. With the rain stopping, things got very quiet, turning the chaotic afternoon into quite a peaceful evening. Trains were stacked up approaching in the distance, and the worst of the storm was now past, with some incredible cloud formations giving way to the evening sunlight. We did not have much longer to stay trackside, but were able to stake it out for one more loaded train, which turned out to be the UP 6760, the same empty consist that we had seen in Bill early this morning, now fully loaded with a fresh shipment and turned around. As 6760 approaches, we see a maintenance pickup truck head down the access road to the head end of the 5307 East to offer any assistance that it can. With the passing of 6760, we bid the impressive scene at Logan Hill farewell and made our way north along Highway 59, taking in the beautiful post-thunderstorm evening. After just over an hour of driving, we arrived in the town of Gillette, the largest town in the region and the gateway to the Powder River Basin. We would grab a great dinner at the Prime Rib restaurant and bar before stopping by the town's rail yard and calling it a night. It was certainly an interesting day out trackside in coal country with everything from intense storms to stalled trains. I hope you enjoyed the video from one of my favorite places in the country, and thank you for watching.